So what we have to do is we have to, basically to get the names of all the films that he was in, we have to do one request for himself, and then 5 additional requests for each of the name of the films. And now let's imagine we also want to know, boom, then we also want to know the director of each of these films, so we also need to load the director again and other stuff. So we will end up with a lot of different requests if the internet will work. So we end up in making a lot of different requests, and it's also very hard to learn how all these things work. So, 1 second. So, on the other side, on GraphQL, if we look in here, so GraphQL has the idea of having a self-discoverable API. So that means while you use GraphQL, you learn how the API actually works. And GraphQL has a really cool tool called GraphQL, which is a system that allows you to type and learn how the API works. So it all works with curly brackets, and you can press Control and space, and with Control and space, it shows you automatically what is currently available here. So I press Control and space, and I can see, oh, there's a person. I want to have a person, good. And I can press Control and enter, and it automatically executes that request. And now it tells me, hey, you must provide an ID or a person ID, okay? So I define a person ID, and I want to have the person ID 1. And I press again, and now I can see I get back the ID. And now I can say, okay, I actually want to have the name. And I can see, oh, Luke Skywalker. And I want to have the height, and I want to have the mass. And I get all this information back. One of the cool things is, there is also another thing. There is a film connection. And in here, if I press here, I can now say, oh, I want to have the title of that film connection. And I get back automatically the title. And I can go deeper. Like if I look here, I can see maybe the planet connection. And now I can see, okay, which planets have been visited in each of the films that each of Luke Skywalker was active. So what I can do, GraphQL removes the idea of the backend telling me what you get back. It basically allows the requester to tell what you need. If I don't need the mass, don't load the mass, don't get it back. But I can also drill down into deeper things. And yes, of course, you can also create fancy loops and stuff like that. But GraphQL changes the whole idea of an API completely upside down. And that's what Facebook did. So now what happens is they have one single API based on GraphQL, and each of the front ends, each of the apps just uses new functionality. If a new app, now let's say I want to also show the hair color of the person, that app will just make a request with the hair color, and another app will not make a request for the hair color. So the idea is to really have a fully system that you can define what you want to do. So GraphQL allows you to get exactly what you need, and only that. It can do multiple resources in one, so you can load the person and the films in there. You have fragments and variables that we didn't look at right now, but you can make the whole system much easier, and if you have a variable, you can define that once and reuse it. And the really cool stuff is, that schema here is completely defined by you. So the person that writes the API basically can say, oh, I have a person and I have a films. If you don't have people, then you don't call it a person. Maybe you have something else. So it's completely free what you want to use, as long as you use these objects. And you can also do mutations. GraphQL can not only load data, it can update, it can create, and it can also delete data with the same system. So if you want to create a new user and a new movie at the same time, you go ahead, you do that. Because the whole system happens on the backend. The backend takes the data, looks at it, and decides what to actually have to send back to the front And it's completely versionless. We learned that already. So if you have a new attribute, you just add that. All the frontends that never heard about that don't care because they don't request it. A new frontend that needs it, awesome, now I can load it. Plus, it is very strongly typed. Over here, we have our docs, and we can see that we have different schemas. So we can see here a film or a person is actually of type person. And the person has a name, which is a string, a birth year, which is a string. We have integers, and we have film connections, which is of type person film connection. And in there, we have another film. So we have object, it's strongly typed. Who can tell me a CMS which is strongly typed? It's called Drupal. It's very strong, compared to other CMSs, it's very strongly typed. So, wouldn't it be awesome if all of that would work in Drupal? Because at the end, that is a node, and that's an entity reference. And that's another entity maybe. It doesn't have to be a node, it could be a menu entry that has another entity reference. So all of that works perfectly for Drupal. So, we went ahead and built it. So, as of today, we have a Drupal GraphQL module which gives you full GraphQL support. You download it, you install it, and you have everything there. All your entities are automatically capable of being exposed via GraphQL. Here a short example. So you have a lot of different ways on how to get into Drupal. You can say, okay, just give me a route. And I say node/1, and I want to have the entity, and I want to have the entity label, the type, and the ID, and it gives it back to you. You really just download the module and install it. But it goes actually much further. So if you want to use it, please learn GraphQL first. There is an awesome website, graphql.org/learn, that within 10 minutes explains you everything you're ever going to need to know about GraphQL. It's super easy to learn, to use. You can expose content in a lot of different ways, and we really suggest you to use the GraphQL. If you install the GraphQL module, the GraphQL is already there, and you can type and you can learn. It's really fun, and it's nice to learn the API on the go while you go through. And yes, control space is your best friend. Use it a lot, because it will tell you everything what is available at that time. And the module itself is actually not one single module, it's a whole set of a lot of different modules. So, and you can really configure it to whatever you need. Don't need blocks to be exposed, don't enable it. Don't need breadcrumbs, don't enable it. Don't need files, don't enable it. Don't need images, don't enable it. You can really define what exactly you want to expose for each of your Drupal site. Plus, you can also go deeper and you can configure like which of the content entities do I want to expose? Do I want to expose articles? Do I want to expose basic pages? Plus, we also use view modes to define which fields you want to expose via the GraphQL API. Because you maybe don't want to expose the password of a user. You maybe don't want to expose the salary if, let's say, you build an HR tool. Maybe you don't want that. So you create a view mode that does not expose that salary, and then it's also not visible via GraphQL. But as mentioned, you can also create your custom views. If you want to have your own set of stuff, you can also create views in Drupal, and they will then expose data via GraphQL. So the GraphQL module, we already use it in production since a couple of months, and it works really awesome. You can bring your own schema. So if you don't like anything of these modules do, you can write your own module that takes the GraphQL and exposes itself. It works not only for content, but also for config entities. So if you like to expose your web forms, it's already there. It has full Drupal cache and cache tag support. So the whole system, the GraphQL request, will have cache tags, will be filled with cache tags. So if you have like a reverse proxy that works via cache tags, it can cache GraphQL. And we also have full mutation support. So we use it, for example, to create comments. So we have a node and people can comment there, and it's all happening in GraphQL. And what they do at the end, they just create new comment entities via the GraphQL. So everything is there, and so far we have not really found something that we couldn't do. And if we find it, we just implement it. So now we have talked about the GraphQL part in the middle. We have talked about the Drupal part that can expose GraphQL. Now we have to talk about the front end. And as I mentioned, we use 3 different tools. We use React as the front-end library that you probably heard of. Apollo is the GraphQL client. So React in itself has no knowledge about GraphQL at all. And Apollo is from the GraphQL community. They created a lot of different GraphQL modules called Apollo. So you will find Apollo for PHP, you will find Apollo for React, you will find Apollo for Angular. And it teaches GraphQL, it teaches React how to talk to GraphQL. And we also use Redux. Redux is a state container, so that means we will see it later a bit that like you have different states of the app. So every time you click, you just generate a new state, and you can automatically jump back with browser-side caching and things like that. So if we remember, in 2013 and 2016, we said SEO accessibility and performance is very bad. So let's look at each of them and why we think now with React and Apollo and Redux, we can fix all these issues. The first thing I want to talk about is SEO and accessibility, which we were very outspoken about, saying you should not use it. So the problem about SEO and the problem about accessibility in general is you will have users or browsers that cannot execute JavaScript. A crawler, even though Google claims it can crawl JavaScript, there are certain situations where it's not doing it. Or you maybe have some specific devices, like screen readers, sometimes disable JavaScript. So you need a way in how to return to the browser something that is already rendered. Because in the past, decoupled websites just basically sent you back 10 lines of HTML with one JavaScript file in there and said execute that, and then the whole app has been rendered. If you have a crawler, well, it will basically crawl 0 because it's empty. So the key to that is called either isomorphic JavaScript or morphic JavaScript or server-side rendering. It's all very much the same. The idea is basically your browser that has never visited a site before requests the page. And now on the server side, we don't have a PHP and an Nginx, we have a Node.js app. And that Node.js app renders the whole page for you. So it executes the JavaScript, it executes the React, renders the whole thing, and takes the whole HTML and sends it back to your browser. So it's like a static HTML page. So the browser receives it, it renders the HTML, it renders the pictures, it renders the CSS, everything is there. But then there is a tiny JavaScript in there that is React. And now it will execute the React, and the React will realize, oh, I'm not on a blank page, I'm actually being rendered on a page that already has been rendered. So instead of re-rendering the whole thing, I will just inject my React code in there. So it will take all the links, it will take all the pictures, and every time that you click on it, it will then not actually refresh the whole page. It will just load the JavaScript, or the React will then do its thing. And after that, the really interesting part is every continuous request does not go to the node anymore, it now goes to GraphQL. Because the GraphQL is now loaded and React with Apollo talks to it. Sounds very complicated? Let me show it to you. So we have here the website beobachter.ch, and what I'm going to do first, as the first thing, is I'm going to disable JavaScript. So we have JavaScript completely disabled, and if I go to the website and load it, I'm going to do a request to the Node.js, and it will send me the whole page back. And you might not believe me, but I can show you. So if we look in here, the response, if I refresh, the response is a huge HTML. So it's regular HTML that we love and hate every day. So it's full React built. So if we like search for text, let's say there's Facebook in there, Aufrufe. So you can see that text here is actually in there. So it's completely pre-rendered. And now, as I have JavaScript disabled, if I click around, so if I click on a link, it just makes another request to the backend, to the node. It renders it again and it sends it me back. I can go back to the start page. So I can click around and I can completely use the app without JavaScript. Now, let's enable JavaScript. enable JavaScript, and I refresh. Now the first request, the exact same thing is going to happen. I'm just loading the page, the whole HTML, but now JavaScript is executed, and now React took over all the links. It morphed itself into a full JavaScript app, and now, if I click on that here, let's look at the network tab. If I click on here, okay, it's very fast, but we can actually see now it did a GraphQL request, and it does not make a full request anymore. If I go back to the start page, boom, it's automatically there because Redux just realized that you clicked on a link that you have visited before, so instead of loading the GraphQL, it just shows you the state of before. So now I have a full GraphQL app that I can click around, I can go back and forth, and it does the browser-side caching and all that stuff. So isomorphic JavaScript solves the issue of if you have somebody that has no JavaScript, if you have somebody that that cannot execute that, they can still use the page. So for SEO, it's great, because the crawler that has no knowledge about JavaScript doesn't matter. The next thing I mentioned was performance. We saw before, in the past, when people used decoupled websites, they all used REST. And if we go back to what we saw from the Star Wars API with REST, we made a lot of different requests. And so what is really cool about React, Apollo, and Redux, they cache everything for us. Plus, GraphQL can actually request multiple resources in one single request. So let's look at that. Let's go back to my thing that we had before, and I need to go back here a bit so it's a bit easier. Okay, so let's actually look at that page. The page exists of main three parts. The stuff on top, which is the menu. So we have a menu up here, and we have the content that goes quite long, and we have the footer in here. So for us, that's three different parts of the website. But that also means I need to request three different, because each of the time I have new entry points. So in GraphQL, I can actually do multiple entry points. And that's what we have here. So I tell GraphQL I want to make a query that is called person, and I want to get the person and the name 1. And then I want to create a completely new query that has nothing to do with all of that above, but I want to do it in the same GraphQL request. I call that film, and please give me all films and all titles. And what we get back is the person, Luke Skywalker, and a completely list of all films that are in that. These are not the films that Luke Skywalker was in, these are all films that exist. And I can go ahead and I can add more of these things in there. So we use the exact same thing. So if you visit the page the first time, we load the menu, the main content, and the footer. But on every continuous request, the footer has not changed. So I don't need to request the footer again. So every time you click, we just really reload what exactly has happened. And the footer, for example, is never reloaded at all. And you don't have to worry about anything of that. It's all handled by Apollo. It's all handled by React. So we have a much better performance because first, we do only one single GraphQL request that goes to the backend, does everything, and we don't have like 10, 20, 15, or sometimes even 50 requests that we saw in the past. The next thing, obviously, if we talk about Node.js and if we talk about server-side rendering, we also need to talk about hosting. Because now we say we want to have a Node server running on the servers. And this is actually how the stack looks like that we use for all these sites. So we have the browser here, and the browser makes the initial first HTML request to the site and says, give me the website, I've never visited it before. And then we have our Docker stack, and in there is a Node.js. So it's a Node.js Express server that receives the request. And it realizes that this request is from a browser that has never visited the page. So it basically runs the Node.js rendering. And the Node.js rendering makes an actual GraphQL request to the Drupal GraphQL module. Then it takes back that HTML and passes it back to the browser. In the browser, the JavaScript now morphs into a whole JavaScript app. So that code that has been executed here, now exactly the same code runs in the browser because they can both speak JavaScript. And then for every continuous request, you make direct GraphQL requests. So the node app here only is active on the very first request, does the server-side rendering, sends it to the browser morphs and does GraphQL requests directly. And the node there has no idea anymore. Pictures, they're pretty easy. They go just regular to the Drupal and they load there. I mentioned though before we have 12 different websites. So how does that work? Well, like that. So the idea is that we have one single Drupal backend that has Drupal in the GraphQL module, and each of the front ends is completely recreated again. So the node part is completely separate. We reuse node packages and things like that. So like regular components we can reuse, but basically all of that here, the node app here, is created every time for one new website. But what is really cool, because they all use the same GraphQL, now a new team can start working on the third or the fourth and the fifth website. They can start theming, and they don't have to worry about the content, because the content migration has maybe not been done, but they already have something to test with, because they all speak the same GraphQL schema. Yes? Currently we use the groups module, but you can do whatever you want. So we decided for the groups, but you could use domain, you could use a taxonomy term, or whatever. Yes. So we basically create the whole thing. Yes?
How different are those node apps? What would be a major difference between the node pre-rendering at site A and the node pre-rendering at site B?
If you want to, so let's look at the sites. So that is the Beobachter.ch, the one we already saw, and this is the Gumio, the other one. So you can see that, for example, the teasers are completely different. Here we have a picture, we have a small term, we have a text and a teaser. Over here, we have no subtitle, subtext and stuff.
Along the lines of the pre-rendering, it's kind of the same process, right? The low-level node server, hey, go render this.
Oh yes, yes. That's exactly the same. The only difference you really have here are the actual React components. The server handling, the server-side rendering, the React, the Apollo stuff, that's all the same. And we created like a stack. So we use node packages to load that in. And really the differences are just the components and the actual logic that has to be different. But everything else is in one node package. I'm happy to show it to you if you want to see it later. So the other thing that we had to think about is caching. We want to have that site super fast, and so we wanted to add CDNs. And as naive we were at the beginning, we thought, okay, let's just add one CDN in there and that's good. And then we realized, oh no, that's actually not that easy. Because first thing we want to do is we want to cache the HTML that is sent back from the node. So this request here, we have a CDN in there that caches the HTML. That is a pretty easy one. The next one we wanted to do is we wanted to cache the GraphQL requests. So they are GET requests. It's also very easy. They have different parameters, also no problem. But then we realized, oh, that node actually also does a GraphQL request. So they also go through the same CDN again. And then we also have one for the images. And the next thing we thought about, okay, now we need to also do purging. Like if people edit the text all the time. We probably have node saves probably every 5 minutes. So we use the Drupal 8 caching system and the cache tag system. And so throughout the whole process of the whole thing, so if GraphQL of the Drupal returns a GraphQL request, it has cache tags in there. These cache tags are loaded by the Node.js, are pre-rendered, and are injected again into the HTML that goes past here, because if somebody changes a node or something, we go to all these different CDNs and tell all of them, remove the cache for that cache tag, and throughout the whole system, the whole stuff is gone. Looks very complicated. It's all part of the regular Drupal GraphQL module and also of the Node GraphQL stuff. So it's all there, it's all supported, but getting there wasn't that easy. Cool. So we learned now about the different parts, and now we actually want to see it, because it sounds quite complicated, and we said as Amazing Labs we want to make it as easy as possible for anybody to learn and how to use it. We put ourselves in there and said, okay, how can we make a system that all of you can use it within 5-10 minutes? You have locally Drupal running with GraphQL, with Node, and you can play around with it. So everything you need, you will find over here. So on Fubi's website, the guy that actually wrote the blog post, Sebastian, it's now hosted on him. And we have a site, or we have a GitHub repository, which comes with a backend. That is a Drupal with GraphQL and configuration already in there that configures all the GraphQL module. So all you do is you run composer install. You run it in, we used Amazee.io Drupal hosting, the Docker container hosting, but you can use anything you want. And you just run drush si with config installer, and it installs the config that you need for the Drupal. And on the front end, so the front end is an actual React app that has all the components in there to load regular articles and basic pages. All you use there is you go in there, you run yarn install or npm install, and it loads you a website that has everything in there. So let's actually look at that. So we are here on my Drupal backend, running in my Docker stack, and I created a content already. So I created a content called Hello Drupal Camp Costa Rica, and it only, right now it's very easy. I have a title and I have a body field, that's it. So that's the Drupal's part. If I go to the modules, I can see that by default, all the GraphQL modules are installed because we want to give you the best experience. So if I search for GraphQL in there, it's all there. But that's basically it. That's the only additional module that we use. The rest is a completely standard Drupal 8 installation. Now we go to the front end. So the front end, if you usually use Node, it starts its own server. So Node starts its own web server. It runs on port 3000, and in there is already a React. So if you look here at that page source, oops, it died. So if you look at that page source, we can actually see that, if it wants to work, this is how in the past, this is with server-side rendering disabled. So we can see here that basically what we do is we just load some JavaScript in there, and then in there the whole thing. So during development, you can either disable or enable server-side rendering based on what you want to use. Sometimes server-side rendering disabled is a bit faster. But what that system actually can do, it loads articles via GraphQL from the Drupal. So if I go to that page on /articles, it shows me the article that I just created. And now, to actually show you that I'm not fooling you, I'm creating another content. I create an article, say hello during presentation. Does this work? I save and publish it. I go back. I press enter, and it will load me now my new content. How does it actually work in the backend? So Apollo has a very nice Chrome extension, like Redux and React, they all have Chrome extensions. Also for other browsers, I'm using Chrome here. So I can actually see the queries that are running by Apollo, the GraphQL queries. And you can see here it's a bit more complicated. So here we actually use fragments and things like that. You will learn all about them if you go and actually learn GraphQL. We don't want to cover that. But basically, we also have a GraphQL inside there. So I can load that, and we can see all these things are loaded. And what we get back here from the Drupal is we have two entities. One of them is number one. We have an URL, so we can also generate automatically nice URLs. We have a title, the body, we have a type name, things like that. So I can also click on that, and it loads me automatically the node up there. If I give that the URL alias, it will automatically use that. So everything is automatically there. I can see each of the queries that is running, and I can see how it works and stuff like that. So everything is already there for you to load, to play around. You can look at the React components, you can play around with them, you can create your own app out of the box. And this is actually what we're using within Amazing Labs to create new projects. So there is nothing secret in there. There is everything in there. If you look into the front end, if you look into the package JSON, we have some dev dependencies that are based on Amazing, but they're also open source. So you can really, as of today, you can download all these things, run Docker Compose up, and you are ready to run and play and learn how the whole thing works. So overall, it was definitely a very high initial investment. We started in August last year, or in October last year, and there was no the GraphQL module barely was able to show some content. So we invested a lot of time there. It was also a huge step in realizing how do you build multiple packages that use the same system and stuff like that. But of what we ended up with, we're so happy that we really believe this can be a possible future if you need more than just a static website. If you need something that people can search, they can open, go back and forth. If you need more like an app behavior of your website, that is the right thing to use. We are completely committed to open source everything that we do. So the GraphQL module is there. We have all the React stuff that we have done. We are doing training. If you go to amazinglabs.com, you can see a lot of blog posts of experiences of people that have never used React and get thrown into a project and how they figured out and things like that. And if we go back to the project, the developers are in love with the whole system, because now I can really focus on what I really want to do is creating different front ends. We actually had different developer streams. So we had a backend team that was working on the migration, and we had a front-end team that was working on displaying the content, and they worked side by side. And they decided once on a GraphQL schema, and after that, the front-end team had mocks for the backend, and the backend team was able to work on the migration. So it was all there. The clients are happy because now they can do what they wanted. They can create a new node and can say, I want to show that on site A and C and D, and it's automatically going to be there. And overall, as me and myself and as Amazing Labs, we are very excited about the future, because we think that this is going to be a new way of how we build websites, how we think about websites. Because I didn't even talk about React Native. If you want to run something native as an iPhone app, you take the same React code, you compile it, and you run it on Android and iPhones, or any other thing. There is React implemented for a lot of other things. React does not need to only render HTML. It can do a lot of different things. So we think Drupal can really be used for the good part that it's very, very good in, which is handling content, working on permissions, and all that stuff. So my question back, who is excited now? Yes? Good. Yeah, basically that's it. If you have any questions, please hit me now. Yes, Chris.
Can you talk about schema definitions?
Yes.
A little bit. Can you put a screenshot or something of the schema definition for, say, content? It's kind of the part of GraphQL that gets glossed over a lot when we talk about it, but I just kind of want to see what one of those is.
So there's something really cool, which is called the Graphical Voyager. And it's a graphical representation of the schema. So yeah. So you can see your GraphQL visually, like we all learned once in school, like these database object relationship models. That's built in, yes. That is Drupal, that is the schema of Drupal right now. So you can say, oh, I want to have menu by schema, and it tells you immediately, and based on that, I'm getting back. And you can also see all these different queries that you have. So because GraphQL actually understands the schema in itself, and the schema can be loaded via GraphQL, and the Voyager then takes that. And the Voyager, you can use that for the GitHub, you can use it for the Star Wars API, for all these things. And that makes it much easier to understand how the whole thing works, what I can do, where can I go to, and stuff like that.
When you're defining these schemas, let me know if I'm too loud here, are you doing a lot of these by hand, or is a lot of this extracted automatically for the Drupal side of entities?
It's fully automatically extracted.
Oh my God.
So the GraphQL module talks to the entity API of Drupal. If you create a new content type, it's automatic there. You have to write no single line of code. The only thing you might need to do is you actually need to expose it. Okay. So the GraphQL module by default does not really expose a lot of things. The decoupled app that we have here has defaults in there, but yeah, so in exposed content, you can go in there, and for each of the content entities, you can define what do you want. And so if you create a new content type, you just go in there, say I want that exposed as well, and it's going to be there.
Amazing. Last question, I'll let somebody else talk here. We've got a GraphQL server. We have an Apollo server sitting as middleware between our front end and a bunch of different backend services, yes. Right? The Drupal already speaking GraphQL,
yes,
and the server being able to speak GraphQL,
yes.
What's that look like, having GraphQL talk to GraphQL, right? I mean, having a middleware talk REST to go get stuff makes sense, right? Or talk SQL or whatever. How do you get GraphQL to talk to GraphQL? What's that look like?
So you mean like, how do I write the GraphQL in the React?
How does when my front end talks to my middle layer and says, I want an article, and that middleware is going to talk to Drupal that knows GraphQL already, how does that, what's that glue look like? What does that look like?
Okay, so I can show you how it works inside that, that article overview. Mm-hmm. So, and because we don't really use a middleware, it might be different, but I can show you how it works here. So basically, this is our, this is the React component for the article overview. We can see like H1s, we can see ULs, and here we actually map. So here we go through all the articles that are given, and we can just see it expects a constant or a variable called articles, and that thing is created, if I find it, is created from here. So you write the GraphQL directly in the React component, and you only write the parts that you really need for that component. So you say, okay, I want to talk to the article overview query. This is actually a node query, and I want to get back the count, the entities, and then I also have some article teaser fragments. And the article teaser fragments are actually other components. So the article teaser is a component that I defined once. So that thing in here, if I find it in here, so the article teaser in itself has another, can I say it? A component, and it defines another GraphQL again. So each of the components define their own. So like the overview defines the GraphQL that it needs to load the articles, and then the article teaser component loads the GraphQL for that. And that's why you need fragments, because Apollo will then look at the whole page, take all the GraphQL together, smush it in one big GraphQL, and sends it to Drupal. It comes back, and it will pick it out again into single pieces and gives it back to the GraphQL. So with that, like, the teaser only focuses about the title, the URL, and the body. And it doesn't care if it's shown on an overview, if it's shown at the bottom of an article. So it's really the idea of having components that define their own thing. Like in Drupal, we have similar things with view modes and stuff like that, but that goes much, much, much further. And the really cool thing, if let's say on the same page, you load the same teaser 7 times, it will actually create only one GraphQL request for that, and it will pick it out again, so it does everything automatically there. No problem. Any other questions?
Basically, you have to enable the node GraphQL Voyager, right?
Yes.
Because of the entity types.
Correct.
What happens if I create a new entity type? Is it going to be exposed immediately?
So, I don't know. Let's try. So I create a new content type called demo. Body is perfectly fine. And if I go back to my exposed content, we can see by default it's not there. So I just enable it. Then I have to tell which of the fields do I actually want to attach to it, because we don't automatically just expose all the fields, as mentioned, because it could technically be something in there that you don't want.
Those are the view modes.
These are view modes, yes. So we use the view mode system to tell which of the fields do you actually want to be available in the content type. So I just select the default here, I save it, and if we go back to our Voyager,
But it is only exposed just the fields as a row, or with the formatting,
with what?
With that formatting, you know, field as different formatting.
The formatters? Yes. So the idea is that you don't really need formatters anymore, because the formatting happens in the React. So you just load the raw data from Drupal, and then you decide how do I format that. Technically, you can use field formatters to actually also render some actual HTML in Drupal and send that back to GraphQL, and then the React actually will just output that HTML. But I really suggest to just think about Drupal as a content hub that has no understanding of HTML at all, and then the whole HTML parsing, the templating, everything happens in React.
And what happens if you're going to, you know, create like a new pseudo field?
Yes.
Is it going to be exposed as well?
Yes. Yeah. If you create a new field, you add it to the view mode, and it's all there.
And if you want to change the format, for example, if you want to strip some characters, then it's going to be updated as well?
Yes. Yeah. It's all there. Yeah. So for example, you can see for my new node demo for the content type, in the Voyager, I can automatically see stuff in there, and I can see how the body is now exposed in there, how I get the title, and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, question back there. I think he wants to have it on the microphone. There's a question up there.
When you're using this, does Drupal still take care of data sanitization, or do you have to worry about that on your front-end app?
Drupal cares about? Or?
Data sanitization, like, you know, data formatters or input formatters. You know,
Yes,
like,
yeah, it will do all that.
So Drupal still respects those, and you don't have, or you,
Yes.
you don't have to worry about those
No.
on the front end.
No.
Cool.
Okay, yeah, play around with it, try it out. If you have more questions, I'm here the whole day. I'm also here tomorrow. So, and if you have any other things, there is the GraphQL module is hosted on GitHub. We have issues there. If you have questions or things like that, it's all gonna happen there, and we're happy to help or to look at pull requests and stuff like that. Thank you.